All right, so once again, good morning and welcome to the World Trade Organization. Welcome to the 2016 Public Forum. This is our 15th Public Forum, and it has always been and remains a highlight of the WTO calendar. Over the last 15 years, this event has brought around 20,000 participants to the WTO and sparked over 4,000 hours of discussions. Now, interest continues to grow with more requests to hold events and more people wanting to take part. Over 2,000 people registered to attend this year, and this is a record number. It's always a pleasure to welcome you all and to hear your views on the big issues of today. And this year, it seems that the issues are bigger than ever. Trade is currently a headline. Everyone is talking about the backlash against trade and globalization. And history suggests that this is not uncommon in times of prolonged low growth. But history also shows the dramatic consequences that this kind of sentiment can have. And in some places, the debate seems to be going in a dangerous direction. So we need to talk about these issues, and we need to ensure the right policies are adopted because it's clear that action is needed. Now, this morning, we announced new figures showing a dramatic slowdown in trade growth around the world, and with growth this year set to be the lowest since the crisis in 2008. So this is a wake-up call. The world has built up a long record of momentum towards open trade. Now this momentum has slowed, and it is affecting economic growth. So we need to refocus the debate, and that means correcting some of the misconceptions and reminding ourselves what is at stake here. Trade has been one of the most powerful anti-poverty tools in history. In recent decades, it has helped to lift 1 billion people out of poverty in developing countries, and it improved lives and livelihoods in developed countries. Now, the charge often leveled against trade is that it sends jobs overseas. But actually, trade is a relatively minor cause of job losses. The evidence shows that well over 80% of job losses in advanced economies are not due to trade, but to increased productivity and through technology and innovation. More than that, the evidence shows that trade is a generator of high-quality jobs and sustained economic growth. Trade-related jobs pay more, and companies that trade are more competitive. Now, for all these reasons and more, we need trade. But it's also important to acknowledge the problems. So this is not a rose garden. We have to have a balanced debate. Talking about the overall benefits of trade is of little comfort to those who have lost their jobs and who live in poverty. Therefore, we need to acknowledge that trade can cause dislocation and can create uncertainties in some sectors and communities. Now, we should acknowledge that the benefits of trade don't reach as many people as they should. Now, we should act, not by attacking trade, but by making it work better. A more closed economy would not save jobs. It would destroy jobs. Salaries would be lower. Prices would be higher. There would be less choice. Economic growth would decline. The poorest would be hit the hardest. And it will likely increase tensions between nations. So we shouldn't try to shut trade down. We should be redoubling our efforts to make sure that it is truly inclusive. And that means building a system where the benefits are shared more widely. So a system that is responsive to those in need. A system that can open up new paths for growth and for development. A system that goes further to support poorer countries to take part and benefit as well as entrepreneurs, SMEs, women, and marginalized groups in all economies. And as a part of this, we must also recognize the effects of innovation and technology. Like with trade, These forces, innovation, technology, higher productivity, they are indispensable for sustained growth and development. So rather than trying to reject them, we have to learn to adapt. We embrace them and we adapt. We have to ask, what will the economy look like 20 years from now? How can we prepare for that economy? For example, if self-driving technology starts to take jobs away from truck drivers and taxi drivers, how are we going to adapt? Now, those jobs are major sources of employment today. Millions depend on those jobs. Now, studies suggest that in some developed economies, almost 50%, half the jobs, are under risk of automation. Now, governments must be prepared for that. Now, in 10 or 20 years, no one can claim that they didn't know that this was coming. Everybody knows that this is coming. Now, technology has already disrupted how we do trade. How we trade. E-commerce was worth around $22 trillion last year. Now, what does that mean for inclusion when still today less than 50% of the world is online? We will have to help people to leverage technology, particularly the SMEs, so that this marketplace doesn't just become the preserve of the big players. Now, these are big issues and big changes, and they need appropriate responses. Now, domestically, new policies will be required to ensure that global forces work in a more human scale, and to ensure that governments can help people adapt to a changing global economy. And the response needs to be across government. This is not a task just for trade ministers. It must bring in finance policy, education and skills, and adjustment support for the unemployed. Now, there are many interesting case studies to learn from, like the wage support provided in Singapore during the financial crisis, or regeneration efforts in Pittsburgh after the decline of their steel sector. And the response must also be at a global level. Now, first, through initiatives which help increase trading capacity in developing countries and in the least developed countries in particular, like the Aid for Trade initiative. And second, through new trade reforms delivered here at the WTO, which lower barriers to help everyone to compete, especially the smaller players. A truly inclusive system would mean all this and more. And so, this is what we want to discuss this week. This is what we are here for. I am absolutely convinced that this is not a moment to turn inward. It is a moment to learn from history and to recommit to openness in trade, while also making the benefits available to all. Now, let's get on with the debate. Let's do it. First, we're going to hear remarks from Minister Oke Enelama of Nigeria, who will be delivering an address on behalf of His Excellency President Buhari. Then we will hear from Commissioner Malmström of the EU. And after that, our moderator, Liu Xin, will lead our discussion and welcome questions from the floor at the right time. So thank you all for listening and for being here. I wish you an engaging and very inclusive few days. Thank you very much again. And now I would invite Minister Enamala to take the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Director General of the WTO, Roberto Azevedo, representatives of WTO members, ministers, ambassadors, and heads of delegation, invited participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so honored to be representing our President, President Muhammadu Buhari, here today, who would have loved to give this speech himself. But I feel honored, like I said, to be in such an important gathering to represent both our country and our president. Thank you all for your presence here today at this opening debate of the 2016 edition of the WTO Annual Public Forum. Your presence here is a tribute to the strength of the WTO as a credible platform for dialogue, especially dialogue on trade. Nigeria thanks the Director General Azevedo for the invitation, and we welcome and support the competent and able leadership you have continued to provide to the organization. The credibility of the WTO indeed has been enhanced by the back-to-back successful ministerial conferences held in Bali in Indonesia in 2013 and again in Nairobi, Kenya in 2015. The government of Nigeria believes that the WTO reconfirmed its capacity as an international institution to deliver for development with new rules in information technology, in trade facilitation, which I understand will be signed up very soon, the Nairobi package for least developed countries, and the enlargement of the WTO with the accession of new members, most recently Afghanistan and Liberia. I believe that the WTO is one of the key institutions for global governance. It is, in fact, the principal forum for international economic cooperation for stability and predictability when it comes to trading and trade relations. Yet, in spite of the progress made, much more work remains to be done to ensure that the WTO proactively delivers on development for all its members, large and small, in particular for the most vulnerable and weakest. Trade rules will need to be more development-friendly in ways that take account of the specific vulnerabilities of developing countries. That's why I think the theme of this public forum is extremely apt on inclusive trade. And I might add also very timely. How can the WTO and its rules contribute to more inclusive trade and support the expansion and more equitable distribution of the benefits of trade across the global economy? Let me just add that it's not just about the benefits of trade, but it's also about the equitable distribution in terms of, the big and small, and the developing and the developed. This is a key question, particularly at this moment, when leaders are grappling with the challenge and consequences of inequality, which has emerged as a major risk to peace and stability. The recent and ongoing experience we've had in Nigeria may well provide some important lessons, so please permit me to share some of these with you. These are challenging times for the Nigerian economy. The problems we face have been building for some time. In fact, over a long period, from the 1970s, the economy became increasingly dependent on oil receipts and what you might call a rentier economy, oil economy. In 2014, the commodity markets collapsed, especially the market for oil. Oil receipts declined by over 60%. The economy experienced a systemic shock, and we're undergoing a necessary, and I might add overdue, process of painful adjustment. Vital lessons are being learned, and we have a plan that is well in progress on how to revitalize our economy across all sectors, based on policy coherence across monetary, fiscal, and structural policies. And the objective is to improve productivity and competitiveness and achieve sustained long-term growth. In response to the current challenges, domestic structural reforms are underway for a modern, integrated, and diversified 21st century Nigerian market economy that will be pro-competition and well-creating and regulated for the benefit of private and public interest, and importantly, also rebalanced to insulate us from external and domestic shocks. Speaking on behalf of the President, we believe that leaders must neither surrender nor backload the challenges of domestic policy reforms. In other words, we have to start from ourselves to diversify and lay the foundations for the economy we want. And the government of Nigeria willingly accepts this responsibility. Such an economy will promote inclusiveness. And again, I go back to the theme of this debate. In the ongoing implementation of our plan for diversification and reform, the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment is pursuing several priority areas that we believe that properly followed will achieve diversification and the results we seek. And I would say the most important is creating an enabling environment, the right investment climate, the right business climate, and making it a lot easier to do business in our country. This would then also translate to reforms in agriculture and the value chains that flow from there into agro-processing and agribusiness, infrastructure development, where we face a significant infrastructure gap that we need to address and are addressing, and the importance of industrialization and attracting investments. We're also working to build a platform for a digital economy, and as has been mentioned by the DG, we're very interested in support for the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the MSMEs. And finally, and I will argue equally importantly, expanded market access for Nigerian manufacturers and service providers into regional and global value chains through ambitious, well-negotiated free trade agreements. An enabling environment for business will level the playing field through reduction of costs, elimination of bottlenecks and inefficiencies, transparencies will be improved, and inclusiveness for all promoted. And this is absolutely critical. We have recently launched the President Enabling Business Environment Council. Institutionally, we have also established the Enabling Business Environment Secretariat. The work we are doing on both of these initiatives will be completed over the next few weeks. Immediate work in this area include entry process. Some of the priorities we have in terms of ease of doing business include the entry process into the country, including issuance of visas upon arrival in Nigeria, expedited business registration to spur growth and reduce the propensity for informal businesses, which is quite preponderant in Nigeria today, elimination of domestic restrictions, and trading across barriers to help improve the ability of Nigerian businesses to export more easily and also improve land registration. As WTO members already know, our government, through its Federal Executive Council, recently approved the Nigerians' ratification of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. And this was on the 24th of August last month. The instrument of acceptance is now being prepared for deposit with the WTO Director General. In our overall plan, investments are being made in the sectors of agriculture and infrastructure as priority areas when we think about diversification. An industrial plan, which we have tagged the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan, is being implemented. Agriculture remains the largest employer in our country. It therefore holds the key to employment, poverty reduction, food security, and also help in reducing inequality and inclusion in the early stages of a market economy. Efficient infrastructure and adequate power, roads, railways, ports, transportation, and telecommunications are important foundations for the modern and inclusive economy we seek to build. Efforts to ensure that trade is inclusive should not only focus on the classical areas of agriculture and trade, but on the rapid changes in information and communication technology and the internet economy, the digital economy. This is an area through which Nigeria is seeking to make up for lost time and leapfrog and achieve modernization and diversification. The digital economy in Nigeria is one of the fastest growing in the world. It currently accounts for approximately 10% of our GDP. In Nigeria, the cities of Abuja, Lagos, Uyo, Port Harcourt, to mention a few, have emerged as centers of the new .coms. There are currently over 150 million active mobile phone lines in Nigeria, a country with a population of about 170 million people, of which over 60% are connected to the internet. There are approximately over 17 million users of Facebook in our country. Daily, there are new technology startups writing apps that solve problems and spur growth. So this is an important area of growth for us. In the midst of the challenge and the pains of adjustment from the collapse of commodity prices, economic activity has been scaled up, and there's an aggressive push for tech companies that point to the trend that Nigeria is on the threshold of a technology breakthrough in the digital economy. In this setting, our government believes that the role of government is to provide support, eliminate bottlenecks and restrictions, and ensure that the soft and hard infrastructure that will support these new tech companies are provided. I believe that Nigeria's ongoing development experience contains many useful lessons for others. For instance, we must avoid being stuck in the past and just being glued to rear view mirror. We must also avoid what you might call business as usual and go beyond the routine. I urge WTO members to be forward-looking in the organization's agenda for trade and inclusion. The Nigerian experience suggests areas where the WTO can be supportive and promote an updated agenda for trade multilateralism. These areas include developing a platform for the internet economy that is unfettered, supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises more, and providing support for homegrown strategies for domestic policy reforms that are needed to diversify our economy. The Nigerian technology startups and SMEs are facilitating easy access and connectivity to the internet. They are providing a major function in the diversification and modernization of our economy. In the 21st century, what we need is a knowledge-based economy. Economies must therefore keep pace with the dynamic transformations taking place in technology and innovation across a wide range of areas, including e-commerce, the fintech areas or mobile money, health services, e-government, to name just a few. A smart Nigeria digital economy is on the drawing board, and I'm glad that some of the forums and interactions I'll be part of during these next couple of days are focused on this digital economy. Although acceptance of responsibility and domestic reforms for structural transformation are the starting points, multilateral action and engagement is important. The overall health of the global economy is an important foundation for constructing a trading system that is inclusive. The current state of the global economy remains worrying. Yet, as in all situations of challenge, there are significant opportunities. International cooperation to foster growth and development is urgent. Multilateralism should remain the first choice in the resolution of the global problems we face, because together we are stronger. Nigeria believes that countries do not engage in trading relationships for the sake of trade per se. Historically, economies have traded goods and services because trade is an engine for growth by enlarging their markets, improving welfare, and expanding their power and influence. The immediate and ultimate goal of trade, therefore, should be growth and development. This is why the WTO and its membership must make trade and the rules of trade count for development. This objective can be achieved by making trade inclusive, which is the theme of this forum, and ensuring that trade rules support domestic policy reforms for growth and prosperity of all its members. Nigeria supports a WTO agenda for digital economy, which will create a platform for SMEs, a platform that SMEs can leverage for more trade, and by so doing, making the trading system more inclusive and more pro-development. An agenda for innovation and the digital economy driven by the private sector and supported by trade rules is long overdue and pressing. This is one of our priorities as a country, and I hope it will be a priority of this forum as well. In conclusion, Nigeria affirms its commitment to a rules-based and transparent, open, inclusive, multilateral trading system, and the WTO is a principal forum for international cooperation that serves the goal of sustained transformation and development. Our dear Director General, I congratulate you and all the members on this 15th anniversary of the Public Forum. I wish you a productive and fruitful week in the exchange of views on the subject of inclusive trade and strengthening the WTO as a primary forum on international cooperation for trade and development. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister Enemala, for your very enlightening opening remarks and the message from President Buhari. I will now offer the floor to Commissioner Malmström. I understand you don't need the lectern. You will be speaking from where you are right now. So let's hear Commissioner Malmström. And after that, the floor will go straight to our moderator, Liu Xin, and she will take it from there. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Director General, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you. Thank you for giving me this possibility to, after the speech by the Honourable Minister from Nigeria on behalf of the President, to kick off this discussion on the very topical subject of inclusive trade. Because obviously very many people in the world today do not feel included in trade. And that is something that we really must take into consideration. There is an increasing debate all across the world, not only in Europe and the US, but also in many of your countries, I think, about the benefits or the lack of benefits of trade. There is a growing anti-globalization movement. There are fears, questions, and we also see the figures that you presented this morning, which absolutely gives reason to be concerned. So those of us who believe that trade is actually a force for good and a formidable way of not only creating growth, jobs and investment, but also connecting people and working for increased benefits globally, must take this debate very seriously. And seize the opportunity to try to turn that. So we need a new kind of trade policy, and in the European Union we've been giving this a lot of thoughts. And we presented a year ago a sort of strategy document that we called Trade for All, with 3 pillars. One is based on efficiency. We need to make sure that trade actually delivers. Sometimes you do great agreements, free trade agreements or agreements in international fora such as here, but it doesn't really trickle down the way it was intended to. So how can we make sure that we work with SMEs, and I'm looking very much forward to the discussion here in a couple of minutes, to entrepreneurs, to the consumers, to make sure that they are aware of the benefits, that they can really use it? How can we make sure that we really discuss relevant topics that are important to solve today, such as services, digital trade, e-commerce, mobility of people, etc. How can we, and that's the second part, how can we make sure that trade is transparent? Not only transparent when it comes to transparent trade, and here we can do a lot, and that's part of the good governance that is needed for trade to function efficiently. But how can we make sure that people who do not trust trade policy makers feel included, or can make sure that they are informed, that we make our trade agreements as transparent as possible? Because the time when we locked ourselves in a room and came up with a trade agreement and see here, there's a trade agreement and only the most devoted nerds really cared, those times are gone. That's not how it works today. People want to know. So we should make sure that we publish, that we engage, forums like this, of course, but also with stakeholders all across the world to make sure that civil society, trade unions, entrepreneurs are included in the whole process of trade negotiations. And the third pillar is, of course, that trade needs to be value-based. We need to make sure that trade is not there to lower standards or take away protection for environment or consumer protection. It is not there to force a government on any level to privatize public services because of trade agreements. It is not there to take away their right to regulate, to protect their citizens. And that's what we need to make clear. We also need to, and that is especially important for us in the European Union, because we are the biggest trade bloc, the biggest economic power. We need to make sure that our trade is responsible, is sustainable, that when we engage with the world, that we need to make sure that we take responsibility of our ecological footprints, that we defend the values we all believe in when it comes to high environmental standards, labor standards, human rights, etc., and that we do this in a responsible way, because that's also part of the transparency. People today want to know how are the products I buy made? What are the conditions in the factories who make my T-shirt? Can we make the chain of the global value chain much more open and transparent when it comes to our mobile phones, for instance? And these are issues we are working on conflict minerals, on much more transparency, on engaging with the countries where the factories, for instance, of clothes are situated. And this is where multilateralism comes in, because that is also a core value, and I think that is one value we all share in this room. And WTO has such an important role to create something bigger global rules, shaping the world trading system and shaping globalization in a way that it's done in an orderly way. And we need to, as the minister say, build upon the successes we had in Bali and in Nairobi, but to move on. And many of the issues that's been on the agenda for a long time are still in the air. I hope we can make some progress this fall to try to define them, because WTO needs, of course, to take the leading role when it comes to inclusiveness of trade. And that goes for the relevant issues: digital trade, e-commerce, services. How can we make sure that not only small companies, but also micro companies, and this is very much about empowering women, for instance, in the developing world. How can we make sure that they are really included in the trade? How can we make sure that we address trade distortion? Not only today we have big problems in certain sectors, such as the steel sector, but also in the agriculture sector. We have unfair domestic support. How do we address these issues? How do we address issues related to fishery? Transparency, again, in the institutions. This is on the agenda, and we need now to focus our efforts in the upcoming work for the next ministerial conference in December next year to really see how we can deliver on inclusive growth in these areas. We have the aid for trade that can help. The EU is the biggest donor. We have set out 12 billion euros last year. We have, of course, the trade facilitation. We really hope that could be signed later this year. And we have in our different trade agreements set out priorities to also help for the infrastructure of trade, to make trade possible, improving institutions, improving transparency, improving the capacity, transport, physical and virtual, and that needs to trickle down. Because if we fail to do this, I think we will see even worse figures next year when you do this, because trade is also about psychology. People need to feel safe and secure that we can pursue these issues. And we can only do that by improving the inclusiveness, by improving the awareness of people and the trust that people today not fully feel vis-à-vis trade. And that is why discussions such as this one and the 3 days where hundreds of seminars will discuss this on a very concrete, down-to-earth basis, as far as the program says at least, and I'm looking very much forward to that. So thank you for having this debate, and thank you for allowing me to kick off the discussion. I'm looking very much forward to hear the contributions of my fellow panelists.
Okay, many thanks, DG. Many thanks to the two ministers who gave very important opening keynote speeches. Again, it's my great pleasure. My name is Liu Xing. I'm the Geneva Bureau Chief of CCTV, the National Television of China. I've been here for almost 6 years. That's why I'm here. Supposedly, I know a little bit about trade topics, but you can never know too much about it. I was reading an article yesterday on the Chinese social media called WeChat, and it was about a very experienced capital investor. She happens to be an alumna of mine from Nanjing University in East China. She has been in the business for 21 years, and yesterday she was describing the first half of this year as a harsh winter for almost all sectors, because they're all facing sluggishness or going downward, except for the sector of online businesses. So as if to back that up with figures, this morning we had a very important press release from the World Trade Organization. I would like to point your attention to that if you haven't. And the title is Trade in 2016 to Grow at Lowest Pace Since the Financial Crisis. And I'll just read out the first sentence. World trade will grow more slowly than expected in 2016, expanding by just 1.7%, well below the April forecast of 2.8%, according to the latest WTO estimates. The forecast for 2017 has also been revised, with trade now expected to grow between 1.8% and 3.1% from 3.6% previously. So indeed, a harsh winter. In this kind of changing business environment and persistent slow growth, how can we make trade truly inclusive. A very quick reminder, if you have just joined us on the internet, of course, sitting to my left, of course, Roberto Azevedo, the Director General of the World Trade Organization. To his left, Dr. Okechukwu Enelama, Industry Trade Investment Minister of Nigeria. Can I call you OK? To his left, Hannah Mellin, Director of Global Public Policy of eBay. And to her left, we already know, Cecilia Malmström, who is EU Trade Commissioner. And to her left is Mr. John Danilovich, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. And to his left, last but not least, is Roy Ombati from Kenya. He's an entrepreneur with a very interesting 3D printing project with a social impact. And I would like to hear much more about his story and how he thinks that the SMEs or MSMEs are really needing at this moment. But before, by the way, we don't have a representative of China or of a Chinese sector here because we were going to invite a representative from Huawei, but last minute he fell sick. But I'm the Chinese perspective here, so I hope that makes up a little bit of a balance here. So before we start, let's first take a look at this short video to raise the curtain of our debate. Right, imagine inclusive trade. I hope we don't have to just imagine that it's actually happening. Let's start with the first question, and I would like to start with Hannah, as we haven't heard from you yet. How and why should trade be inclusive from your perspective?
Thank you, Shin. Well, often to keep things simple, you should start with what first comes to mind. And watching the video and then your question, what first comes to mind for me right now is Mafi. She is an Ethiopian entrepreneur and fashion designer. Her pieces, beautiful, handmade, locally sourced cotton, and she was featured in Vogue Italy this summer, so you can look her up if you want. for her, trade is making it as an international designer. International trade for her can be business expansion, building a brand, and bringing home more work to the weavers, the female weavers she employs in Addis Ababa. And at the same time, trade for the world's consumers can be accessing Mafi's pieces directly themselves and sharing in her story. And I think that here you have the reasons why trade should be inclusive. Trade should make globalization something we can understand, and we can understand what we can when we can see the benefits, when Mafi can see the benefits, when her weavers can see the benefits, when individuals as consumers can see the benefits. And I would say that right now the most powerful model for connecting more people and more enterprises to the global economy is through technology-enabled trade. And I say that based on on findings from research from 5 years of studying trade patterns by small businesses over the eBay marketplace. Most of them are micro-sized. Many are remotely based. They are from advanced and from emerging economies. But there's no doubt that when given a chance, they all expand globally. They leverage the internet, they leverage technology to transact directly with customers in, on average, 20 to 40 different countries in a year. And just to remind you how revolutionary that is, micro firms don't normally export, as we've heard. Large firms account for somewhere between 67 and 87% of world trade, and most of them deal with one country. And that is because of the huge costs of trading over distance. And so small enterprises, they've had limited opportunity to participate in trade, either directly or through a larger firm's value chain. And so what is unique now is that technology-enabled small businesses can engage in a global commerce as independent companies. They can do so under their own brand. They can do so within their capacity, whether it's margins or volume, and they can do so almost irrespective of where they are located. And so they can both serve a local economy and global markets. So, Shin, if I come back to your question, I would say that the why trade should be inclusive is the Mafis, and how is technology-enabled trade.
Thank you very much. More interesting details we can explore later, but let's hear from John. As Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, what's your take on this question?
Thank you very much. I think it's important that when we talk about inclusive trade, that we should view the glass as half full rather than half empty. It's important to recognize that trade is already an inclusive force within the global economy. Of course, it's easy to talk down trade, and it's important not to listen to the narrative of people like Donald Trump, who are anti-CAFTA, anti-NAFTA, anti-TTIP, anti-Trans-Pacific, anti-free trade, free markets, free enterprise, but to listen to others who are positive about this agenda. And I think the Director General this morning in his opening comments brought to bear some extremely important statistics in this regard. Free trade is not simply a tool of big companies at the expense of the man on the street. The facts tell a positive and more optimistic story. Because when we look at the inclusion of developing countries in international trade, it's clear that trade has been a powerful engine in reducing poverty and has delivered remarkable economic gains already. There are several real-world examples to tell this story. China has tripled its share of world trade since joining the WTO in 2001, helping to cut its extreme poverty rate from 36% at the end of the 1990s to 6% in 2011. In Ethiopia, exports to the European Union have cut flowers by one firm opened up to a larger export industry that now employs 50,000 workers. It's also generated more secure employment and a pathway out of poverty for families of those workers. Since 2000, the developing country share of world trade has increased from 33% to 48%. South-South trade between the developing countries has increased from 8% of the world trade to 25% today. It's clear that without international trade, global poverty could not have been cut by half since 1990. But I say glass half full because there is much more we can do to ensure that trade plays an even greater part in improving the lives of families across the world. So how do we get there? During last week's UN General Assembly meetings in New York, we saw a broad range of competing and complex initiatives launched to support the Sustainable Development Goals. My view, when it comes to enabling trade as a driver of economic development, is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Rather, we should look at the basics and keep things simple. So here are 3 core principles to make trade more inclusive. The first is to focus on trade facilitation. The WTO's Trade Facilitation Agreement provides an incredible opportunity to remove unnecessary barriers to SMEs across the world. If we are serious about making trade more inclusive, then we need to secure ratification and then ensure implementation of the TFA and make sure that resources are available to support commercially meaningful reforms to make it easier for entrepreneurs in the developing countries to go global. Second, we need to obtain and ensure that the businesses can get hold of the finance they need to trade internationally. Small businesses in developing countries often rely on bank credit to allow them to export. But new ICC data shows that around 60% of SME applications for trade finance are turned down by banks. The Asian Development Bank estimates that there is currently a 1.6 trillion shortfall in trade finance globally, and SMEs, which typically have little access to alternative forms of financing, are clearly suffering most acutely from this yawning gap. Lack of financing is not a recipe for inclusive trade. It's a huge impediment. Of course, banks need to be prudent, and financial regulation is more demanding today than it was before the financial crisis. But if governments are serious about using trade to drive development, we must urgently help developing countries and deserving businesses to get financing for their international operations. A useful starting point would be for the G20 governments to commit exploring the implementation of whether implementation of tougher financial regulations has inadvertently stymied the flow of finance to small businesses. Finally, as a number of speakers have already noted, we need to maximize the potential of the internet to drive inclusive growth. The Director General and I were recently in Silicon Valley in California, and a number of people who we met there talked about how the internet has democratized voice. We need to focus on how to democratize trade as well. The internet is already enabling small businesses to access global markets unlike ever before. Studies show that SMEs use online platforms are around 5 times more likely to export than those in the traditional economy. Small businesses and entrepreneurs in developing countries are already in the forefront of this emerging trend. So the challenge for governments and WTO members is to speed and accelerate this exciting dynamic. Tomorrow, we'll be unveiling new business recommendations for a possible WTO e-commerce agreement, which we have developed through the WTO's trade dialogue process. And it's clear from the work that we have done that there is enormous potential to use the power of the internet to ensure that all companies, regardless of size, sector, or location, can benefit from equal access to the global trading system. Some common sense measures under the auspices of the WTO could go a long way to making this vision a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Now, finally, let's hear from Roy, who came from Nairobi specifically for this public forum. Roy, you had the idea, you started this company called AB3D in 2014. Tell us a bit your story and why do you think trade should be inclusive and how it can be inclusive?
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. As she mentioned, my name is Roy Ombati from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the founder of AB3D, which stands for African-Born 3D Printing. where we deal with the local production of affordable and robust and quality 3D printers out of recycled waste material. So they're built out of electronic waste, locally available parts, and some 3D printed parts. So we're trying to keep the entire production local, and in that way create jobs and stuff. I've been doing this for about almost 2 years now, having been exposed to 3D printing 4 years ago. And the idea was, which is what I'd like all of you to take home from at least what I'm bringing to this forum, is I and many other local innovators in Kenya see problems as opportunities. And because of that, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So what I'm doing right now came as a result of the Jiga menace in Kenya, which is a small sand flea that feeds on people's flesh and blood. Mostly it affects only those who are most poor because not only can they afford shoes, but they can't afford proper hygiene, and that's how they get exposed, and that's how they fall sick and become susceptible to these problems. As a result, their feet become deformed, they can't fit into a normal shoe, they're in a lot of pain, there's a lot of stigma around it, and these people are just neglected. So I came up with the idea of creating a custom shoe for each individual, where your right shoe will be different from your left. And at the time is when I was tinkering with 3D printing, and I decided to use that as the tool, the manufacturing process. So several iterations later, it became apparent that perhaps using 3D printing was not the best solution because it is quite expensive still, and just access to technology was challenging. We had one 3D printer in the whole of Nairobi, and this was 4 years ago. Okay, now there are more, but there was such challenge. So we decided to pivot a bit, and now we are building the 3D printers themselves. So that's just a bit of the story. And the idea is to create access to this potentially revolutionary technology, and in turn help people. So we're very excited about the product side of things, where we support ventures such as the shoes themselves. The project is called Happy Feet, and also we're trying to push prosthesis agenda and an education agenda as well. I personally believe in the power of making as a tool for learning. So we're trying to teach kids how to use it. How we're trying to get our printers into schools, and by that revolutionize the education system locally. Yeah, another thing I should also add is that we, in an effort to try and support the entire 3D printing ecosystem, we're also extruding filament from the recycled waste plastic. So yes, we're doing quite a bit, but we are trying. And that's my main message. So how do I feel trade could become inclusive? By looking for more stories like mine. There are very many people singing this African narrative, we're trying to, like I said, we see problems as opportunities. So focus on the small and micro-scale entrepreneurs and give us the right support structures to flourish. For example, that video that was played in the beginning is like it resonates perfectly with my story. I started off by myself. I brought on a few friends with no money, working from literally a garage space. And unfortunately, we're still at the same garage space, but we've grown significantly. We're now at least 5 employees in total, still taking home almost minimum wage. But the point is we're trying. We have a vision, and that's what we're working towards. So I feel that more can be done to support the small-scale entrepreneurs. And not just that, because like most of what is being shared on this panel is things I think of and I just shy away because we've had to turn down so many international customers because we just can't fathom how to ship our product outside Kenya. The idea is to lower barriers of access to this technology, but then after doing some calculation, it costs us more to ship the product to even Uganda than it costs for you to buy the product locally, which doesn't make sense. So I feel it takes effort both nationally and internationally to set up the right systems and structures in place to support enterprises such as my own. And yeah, I think that's what I would say. But generally speaking, how to make this trade inclusive is vet enterprises such as my own, because even as I tell this story, I'm very proud of our product. It's not something shabby. It's something that competes with commercial 3D printers out there in the market right now. I wish I could have brought one to demonstrate, but with that being said, we're not asking for pity. We're not asking for money to be sent our way because we're helping people. No, it's a quality product that speaks for itself. So instead of pity or money to go towards that, give us a fair chance. Give us the right support to make this happen. And I personally can guarantee that we will touch a few lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. When you are saying... Bravo. And I think what touches me really, he is a micro enterprise and he's setting out to help the people who are even less included in the development or growth of the general world. Roy, if I'm going to ask you to use one word to define what you see as the biggest obstacle, which word would you use? Is it finance? Is it loan? Is it capital? Is it investment? What is it?
In one word, I would say it's all those, because they all revolve around money.
But you just said you didn't come here to ask for money.
No, yeah, I didn't. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, that's a challenge. And like I was sharing with some people yesterday evening, I don't like asking for money. I'd rather ask for support to help. I like to call them projects. So, for example, right now, our main project is trying to get 3D printers into schools. So we've worked on the curriculum, we've worked on the content, we've worked on the training manual, like everything. We've done our part, but rolling out such a project is big. So at the end of the day, we need money to make that happen. So instead of giving me money, I'd rather you partner with me and work with me to implement something that we both feel is mutually beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the reason why I asked that question was because I wanted the rest of the panel to think of ways from your respective capacity how we can help someone like Roy to develop his business. Maybe I would start with Mr. Azevedo. What is your reaction to what Roy just said?
I think he's spot on the money. I think that's a huge problem. And in fact, we have detected this after many studies have been done. I don't remember who mentioned a recent study by the Asian Development Bank, I think, $1.6 trillion of shortfall in terms of financing. And I have several other studies who put the gap at the same order of magnitude. And more than that, which is striking is the fact that in some studies, I have seen about 2/3 of all requests for financing which were submitted by small and medium enterprises, they were rejected by the banks. And more than that, for small and medium enterprises, once they are rejected, they don't try again. They're discouraged. And that is a huge problem. And I have been looking around, and I, in particular, have talked also to Jim Kim of the World Bank, and I mentioned to him that this is a problem. What the funny thing is that the money is available. It is there. It's not lack of resources. It's just that all of those resources are channeled through banks. And it's, of course, much easier for banks to lend several $1 million to a few companies than a few $1,000s to thousands of small and medium enterprises. They don't know the customer. They don't know what the credit worthiness is of all of those. So clearly, there is more that we can do. Clearly, there is more that we can do. We are already trying to reach targets to increase the amount of resources available. But in my view, that's not enough. So we need to make sure that that money finds its way through to the small and medium businesses that require it. And they need it in so many different ways. It's not only developing and buying the products or developing the technology, developing the product. It's also financing the exports. Roy someday may get a shipment order from a big company in one of the advanced economies, and he would love to meet that. He doesn't have the money to finance the production. No. So the order is there, the opportunity is there. He cannot he cannot do it because he doesn't have the money the cash flow to finance the production and receive once the payback when he receives the payment. And I have talked to people who do that, and they say the default rate for small and medium enterprises is nearly zero. There is almost no default whatsoever. So clearly there is more that we can do, and that's something that we have to address as soon as we can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, from the perspective of Nigeria, is what he... John, can I come back to you in just a second? Yes, from the perspective of Nigeria, what is your reaction?
I would say, for the most part, our experience is consistent, and let me elaborate. First, we in my ministry, Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, do have considerable responsibility for SMEs. And having listened to them since I joined the government, there is no question whatsoever that access to financing is one of the top sort of challenges. And if you wanted to cut through the chase, because there's a lot of, like Roy pointed out, or the DG pointed out, there's a lot of aid and a lot of money sort of swirling around. I'll give you one case study. A particular development institution has money from my ministry, to help promote growth, employment, and so on. And this money is over $100 million. And we've gone back to them to say, frankly, we need to channel most of this money into the hands of the SMEs, rather than training them more, doing more of the ecosystem, everything but the money they need. So, and the reason why this is even more appropriate here is that, as you know, my background is private equity and venture capital. That's what I've done for 21 years before I joined the government. So, and it's a specialized area. By the way, I would add to what the DG said. It's not that the default rate is zero. Quite to the contrary, it's high. But as an ecosystem, if you deal with it as a group, the result is net positive by a long margin. And this is both equity and debt. It's a bit like insurance. You know what I mean? You have to deal with it you have to have a critical pool. And therefore it's important that capital is made available in a holistic way, because the economy develops, they get resources they need, whether it's working capital, whether it's long-term debt, whether it's equity. And they do need capital in all those. So I do agree, and I believe that there's a lot more can be done. In fact, one of the things I hope we'll discuss, not just in this forum, but in the bilaterals and subsequent meetings, is where is the money? So that we cut through it and get to where the money is and how we can channel it to those that really need it. I know that my country will benefit a lot, our SMEs, from such an approach.
Mm-hmm. John, please go ahead.
I think the points that have been raised about the money, it's about the money, honey, is always important and fundamental. And as Roberto mentioned with regards to the ADB statement about the 1.6 million shortfall in trade finance, it's a staggering figure. But when you have a good product, and who cannot love a product called Happy Feet? That's important to me today because my shoes hurt. So I think Happy Feet is a great name. And when you think what he's doing with regards to the problems he mentioned in Kenya, there has to be a market for this globally. If he's having a problem with Uganda, which is next door, and he can't get in because of the transportation costs or because of protectionism, or there's a difficulty with the European market because of protectionism, it's also the money and protectionism that's the problem for developing SMEs. It's critical. The Global Trade Alert said that there's been a 40% increase in protectionism since 2015. That's not a good sign. These barriers have to drop so that companies like Roy's, so that Happy Feet can succeed on a global basis.
Cecilia, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I was also very, very touched by your company. I think it's fantastic what you do. Obviously, there's not a magic solution there, but we are right now engaged with your government in Kenya and many of the surrounding countries, trying to finalize the economic partnership agreement between Kenya and the countries of East Africa. Kenya have signed, so has Rwanda, Uganda and Tanzania. Need a little bit more time, but we hope that they can come there. And in that free trade agreement, which is more an economic partnership than agreement, because it is opening up the European market asymmetrically, much more than we ask for your countries to do, obviously, to protect some infant industries and some sensitive sectors. But in that, there is a lot of development money as well to be used in a targeted manner, tailor-made, as defined by the different countries. Of course, microloan and microfinancing could be one part of it. And also there is special money set aside for regional integration, helping with the practical problems of trade between Kenya and Uganda, which could be customs facilitation or training or computer system. I don't know, it's up to you to define. So this is something that potentially could help your company and other companies. And this is right now, we hope that this process with Kenya will be finalized within a couple of weeks. And then other countries hopefully will join before the end of the year as well.
Hannah, please go ahead.
Yes, just a very quick remark. Because before Roy did not ask for money, I heard him say that it's important to tell the story. And I think that's a very important point. It's important to tell the story in this type of forum, but also in other forum. In initiatives such as E-Trade for All, an UNCTAD new initiative, bringing together private sector, public sector, organizations, governments, to tell the story, because we might here have heard about it, but not everyone and not all authorities or agencies have heard about it. A very concrete example is a project that eBay is working on together with the International Trade Center, where we are together trying to facilitate for small enterprises, entrepreneurs in African countries to sell directly into Europe. And in the context of that project, we work with governments, and that's a very concrete way of uncovering bottlenecks, like hands-on. This is not working right now. This is why these 15 entrepreneurs in the room cannot ship, and then together trying to solve them. So I think raising it in different forum and then collaborating to solve the problems.
Yes, indeed. That's why I'm very happy that Roy is present here, which gives us an excellent case study here. Well, we are about to enter the Q&A session. I'm feeling a bit mixed because I would like to hear more. The subject is so huge, but we have just about 25 minutes to go into question and answer. Shall we go into question and answer? Okay, so a very quick line on the rules. Please say your name, where you're from, and keep your question short and clear, not a statement, just a question. One question at a time, please. And shall we start from this side of the room? This gentleman over there, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Simon Lacey from Huawei Technologies. I was just really interested in what was said about trade finance, because if you think about back to 2009, right after the financial crisis, the collapse in global trade that we had was the result, on the one hand, of a collapse in demand, but the other thing was the collapse in trade finance. So it's sort of suffered, global trade suffered from what was called as, was being referred to as a double whammy. And I just wanted to ask the representative from the ICC, you say that we need to do more research into this, but you must have some anecdotal evidence from your members about what is the problem with trade finance. I mean, is it really just Dodd-Frank, or is it something more profound? Trade finance is one of those things that kind of falls between the cracks, because the trade guys are all focused on agreements, and the finance guys are all focused on, developing extremely complex financial products that they can sell to people, and so nobody's really looking at trade finance very carefully, but it seems to be very, very important.
So the question is clear. What is the problem with trade finance? And by the way, I did not know that he was from Huawei, okay? Just by chance that I picked a Chinese company. Another question, please, on this side. Okay, there is a lady in green in the back. Please just press on the button on your table and you can speak.
Thank you very much. Sanya Reed-Smith from Third World Network. We all want to help micro, small and medium enterprises and also ensure that e-commerce can help development. So the question is, should there be rules at the WTO on this? And if so, what should the rules be that would help the real problems faced by micro, small and medium enterprises, especially in developing countries and least developed countries? Because we see the US non-paper from July this year on the WTO website is putting forward policies like restrictions on performance requirements, for example, a total ban on requiring technology transfer. This is TRIMS Plus. It's an investment issue, even though investment issues are not supposed to be discussed at the WTO as Singapore issues in the current Doha round. It's even Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement Plus, because it's a total ban, not even on a negative list basis. The US is also proposing cross-border data flows with insufficient privacy exceptions.
So your question,
on the
I'm
ability
sorry.
to require local servers, which has tax implications.
Your question really
and lastly,
is that one question? Where is the
telecom
question,
reference
please?
paper.
Where is the question, please?
The question
should
was,
there be rules?
what should the rules be on e-commerce in the WTO if
Okay.
there are e-commerce rules,
Okay,
given that this
this
is the
is-
US proposal and these are the implications for developing countries and least developed countries?
Thank you, thank you. Any question here? Okay, that gentleman in the middle.
Jacques Berthelot de Solidarité.
Berthelot from Solidarity.
Bien, il a été dit par plusieurs intervenants que c'est la multilatéralisation des échanges qui est la plus efficace. Et donc, je voudrais m'adresser donc notamment à la commissaire Malmström, qui multiplie les accords bilatéraux de libre-échange et dans lesquels donc dans ces accords, elle impose une ouverture des marchés qui n'est pas exigée par l'OMC. Et là, je rebondis. J'ai sous les yeux un graphique qui montre que plus les pays sont développés, moins ils sont intégrés dans les échanges internationaux. Par exemple, pour les États-Unis, le Japon et l'Union européenne, c'est à peu près 18% de leur PIB qui est leurs échanges correspondent, leurs échanges uniquement là de biens correspondent à 17% de leur PIB, alors que dans les pays en développement, plus ils sont sous-développés, plus ils sont intégrés. Donc il n'y a pas vraiment une... Alors, ce qu'il faut développer, par contre, c'est les échanges régionaux. Et là, malheureusement, avec les accords de partenariat économique, par exemple, bon, c'est l'ouverture qui est demandée, la baisse très forte donc des droits de douane prélevés sur ce qu'ils vont importer de l'Union européenne. Et par exemple, vous avez pris l'exemple du Kenya. Eh bien, le Kenya, donc, la communauté des États d'Afrique de l'Ouest. Non, ma question, c'est donc, ma question est plus généralement, il y a une contradiction entre le fait que les pays les plus développés échangent surtout sur leur marché intérieur ou à l'intérieur, par exemple, de la communauté européenne, et très peu, relativement peu par rapport aux pays en développement qui sont obligés d'exporter des matières premières. Ma question, c'est le discours qui consiste à dire ouvrez vos frontières pour plus de libre-échange. Non, il faut développer les échanges internes régionaux. C'est ma question. Est-ce que les représentants des pays en développement ne pensent pas que c'est d'abord les échanges internes comme les pays développés l'ont fait, avant de s'ouvrir à des échanges dans lesquels il y a des subventions qui ne contrôlent pas, etc. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Okay, shall we start with these three questions first? First is question for finance. I think that's for John. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. Absolutely spot on. Over the last decade, in the last 10 years, because of the meltdown that occurred in the financial crisis, the suffocation of trade and business that's occurred because of the overly aggressive rules and regulations that were put into place, even also by Basel III, have had a negative effect on trade. And I think it's time for this to be openly acknowledged, for organizations such as mine, the International Chamber of Commerce, and others to bring this to the forefront, and that there needs to be a review and revision of these rules and regulations so as to open up the markets both nationally and internationally for trade. I think there's no question about that. I think it's been proven, and it's obviously the case. The more we can bring pressure in that regard, I think the better off business is going to be.
Roberto, you would like to address the question on the rules in the WTO for e-commerce?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and I think it's a question that no one at this point in time can answer very clearly, because this conversation is just starting. I think not only among members, but also between the WTO and the private sector and other constituencies, labor as well. We're talking to people to see in which way we can help the micro, small, and medium enterprises, in which way. I think Hannah mentioned two very important pillars for helping small and medium enterprises. One of them is technology enabling them. And how do we do that? And I think rules in the WTO, I don't know whether you need rules that constrain. I think at this point, that's my personal opinion, I think what you need is rules that enable, rules that make it easier for a small and medium enterprise to participate, that help connectivity, that help, for example, to frame in some developing countries, in the least developed countries, for example, you don't even have the human resources to set up the framework, the legal framework, let alone the infrastructure that is needed to connect those small and medium businesses. So I think we need to get our priorities straight and go in that direction. Members are, each one of them, are making their proposals, they're saying what they think. Whatever they say doesn't mean that it's the absolute truth. It doesn't mean that necessarily that's going to be the outcome. There will be different perspectives, and we have to give time for this process to evolve and see where we end up.
Okay, third, Hannah, you would like to add something on this?
Yes, I could. So building off what the Director General said, if I think about what we see as enablers, it's technology is technology, it's wide. So what we see as enablers are what we call four building blocks of technology-enabled trade. And it starts with connectivity, as Director General said, access to connectivity to the internet without gatekeepers and at reasonable prices. It's access to global platform-based services, marketing, marketplaces, payments. It's delivery and logistics that's connected at package level. And then it's also where I think the WTO has an important role. It's in the mindset, the type of, whether it's rules or policies or procedures that we need, they must be designed for a very different world. I was last week at a meeting by the WCO, and Japan's Customs Bureau, Mr. Sudo, he made a presentation that was very spot on. So he compared today, or the old world, with limited known exporters and small number of large cargoes, to the new world of unlimited, unknown traders and a large number of small packages. And that is a very different world. It might sound scary and overwhelming, but when we talk about enabling micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, it's actually about numbers. Could I give you one number? So I come from Sweden. In Sweden, 6% of micro retailers export. That is 3,500 retailers. On eBay, sort of across the world, about 90% of micro and small enterprises sell internationally. If 90% of Sweden's micro, small and medium-sized enterprises exported, that would make 54,000 retailers. That is 15 times today's exporters. And this is just one country, one small country. But if you take that and you sort of you multiply it by all countries of the world, most countries in the world, 90 to 99% of their enterprise population is made up of micro, small and medium-sized enterprise. That's the numbers we're talking about. So it's a very different world.
Let's go to the third question. Cecilia, you were mentioned. Yes.
Oui, je vais essayer de répondre à la question de monsieur. C'est tout à fait correct, monsieur, que l'Union européenne négocie la Commission sur un mandat des États membres, plein d'accords bilatéraux, certains avec des pays développés et certains avec des pays en développement. Mais comme j'ai expliqué auparavant à notre ami du Kenya, les accords que nous négocions avec les pays ACP, par exemple en Afrique, sont des accords asymétriques. Donc nous ouvrons le marché européen beaucoup beaucoup plus que nous demandons aux pays, Kenya et autres, d'ouvrir le leur pour protéger certaines industries sensibles ou certaines industries qui sont en croissance. Et c'est fait d'une manière individuelle, nous négocions avec eux pour faire cela. Et je crois que c'est une bonne chose si la technologie européenne peut accéder plus facilement à ces pays pour que les pays peuvent utiliser leurs ressources pour avancer dans les chaînes de valeur. Mais aussi ces accords incluent un grand nombre pas seulement de politique, mais aussi d'argent pour aider à la coopération régionale. Que je suis tout à fait d'accord avec vous. C'est important qu'on peut faciliter le commerce entre le Kenya et l'Ouganda, qui ont plein de problèmes pratiques. Donc, nous essayons d'utiliser ces accords qui sont des accords de coopération économique aussi pour aider ces pays à renforcer leur commerce régional. Donc, l'un n'exclut pas l'autre.
So one doesn't exclude the other.
Okay, you would like to add a few points? It's fine. Okay, then let's go to the next round of questions, please. There's a lady over there with please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Debjani Chaudhary from World Trade Center, Mumbai, India. A little bit has been said about infrastructure in the speeches of two our esteemed panelists, so I focus on that. Infrastructure is a key enabler of inclusive trade and growth. The Aid for Trade initiative of WTO does address the issues of infrastructure, partially along with other issues, but is there any comprehensive work program on infrastructure under the WTO agenda to assist countries around the world to engage more effectively in the development of infrastructure to propel inclusive growth and trade?
Thank you very much. More questions on this side of the room? Okay, there is a lady over there. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Victoria Câmpeanu. I'm from the University of Bucharest, Romania. I am very happy to be here again, and I think that inclusive trade is very important, but in order that trade should be inclusive, we have, WTO members, governments, and maybe also the organization to do something about education. If we want trade to be inclusive, that means that mostly the small and medium-sized enterprises should have enough knowledge about trade and the trade rules. Now, how can we do it? And here is a question to Director General, if possible. Would it be possible, for instance, that the TPR mechanism has a small spot or light on how WTO rules are taught in the countries which are under the process of review? This might be a way of encouraging governments to do more about teaching the business environment on trade rules which are established by the WTO, and at the same time giving them an instrument to better act in the global world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. One more question over there. Okay, that young gentleman in the back with glasses, please. Yes.
Yeah, I'm so happy that today I have two coming from my country. One is the Honorable Minister Okechukwu, because I'm coming from Nigeria. And also my country, China, has Liu Xin there. So I'm so happy.
Are you Nigerian or Chinese?
Actually,
or dual citizen?
I'm Chinese holding a Nigeria green card.
I see.
Yeah, thank
Please
you,
go
thank
ahead.
you. Actually, when I'm working for the ICT company, and once when the minister mentioned about the mobile money, the e-government, the digital Nigeria, we are so excited. So now we know that in Nigeria, for example, one of the biggest carriers, they are providing a so-called Music Plus. This platform helped a lot of musicians to create much more art masterworks. Right now, more than 15,000 of the musicians benefit from this platform. I think this is so-called the enabling. So now we have so many also digital platforms locally like eBay, so-called Konga, Jumia, Gigi.com, right, in Nigeria. And all these platforms, they need a facility, an infrastructure facility to enable them. So my question is, right now in Nigeria, the price of the bandwidth is very high, which affected the platform. So Nigeria government is also facilitating the national broadband plan, including like Galaxy and InfraCo. However, we found that the right-of-way issues is one of the most sensitive and most important challenges to these plans to bring better connectivity to Nigeria. So is there any plan on this case from the federal government?
Thank you, thank you. Okay, 3 questions. I think the first 2 actually all addressed to you, Roberto. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, but I encourage the other participants of the panel to pitch in as well. On infrastructure and the fact that Aid for Trade does that partially, is there more room for the WTO to work on infrastructure? Let me start by breaking down a little bit the type of infrastructure. So you have the hard infrastructure and you have the soft infrastructure. So the hard infrastructure, which means, for example, the building of ports or the installation of, in the case of e-commerce, of telecommunications, hardware, really. There is a limit to what the WTO can do in those circumstances. We nonetheless are clearly sensing that it's difficult to talk about connectivity and e-commerce in an inclusive way if we don't realize that infrastructure is a very important element in connectivity, and we need to help. So we are looking into how we can maybe catalyze work together with other organizations. I'm going to be in Washington very shortly, and one of my goals there is to have a deeper conversation with the World Bank. And whenever I go to other areas, my intention is to talk about regional development banks and see whether together we can identify projects and programs that can interact and help what we're doing here in terms of inclusive trade. So that is hard infrastructure. On soft infrastructure, we are doing quite a bit. In fact, we receive and offer training courses here in the WTO, especially for government officials, so that they understand better what needs to be the best practices. We share best practices. We don't impose anything. The WTO doesn't say this is what you have to do. We just say this has been done in some countries and it worked. Does this work for you? And then we interact with them. We have a program, for example, for the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which was about needs assessment. So we would send teams to the capitals and to regions to look at the conditions on the ground and see what kind of infrastructure, soft infrastructure was needed for them to minimize trade costs, for example, for their own producers, for their own businesses. And this is something that we are evolving, we're learning. And I think so that's a very good question, because I think this is something that we have to do even more. On education.
Yes.
As part of the picture, I fully agree with that. In fact, in my presentation, I said this is not something that can be addressed only by the ministers of trade. This is a government-wide effort, and education and building of skills, preparing the workforce for the new global economy is extremely important. Now, what can we do in our little garden, I think? It's precisely that. So I think getting people to understand better what the rules are, what the requirements are. Like Roy mentioned, he doesn't know what is the requirement at the other side of the border. What does he have to do to adapt his production for that particular market that he is targeting, that he wants to achieve? So transparency is very important. Now, this is something that here in the WTO we're trying to do, is that governments publish and put online, and in an easy, in a user-friendly way, what the requirements are if you want to do business in that country. So this is something that would help Roy. He doesn't have to hire someone to go find out what the requirements are in a particular country. He goes online, and in a very user-friendly way, he finds that out. We're working with WTO chairs in universities to also disseminate that information. Trade courses here in the WTO, where we train people, we train government officials, we train private sector people as well, and share knowledge with them. More can be done. I like the idea of the TPR. In fact, we're thinking about how we can
TPR
use
is trade policy review. Yes.
So the country comes to the WTO, and the members and the secretariat ask questions. They do a diagnosis of the trade issues for that country. And I think this exercise should not end there. It should be just the first step to something. We spend a lot of money in this TPR. So how do we use the TPR to help the country identify the shortcomings, and how can we do better? How can we take further steps? So I like that idea very much. This is something we're working with.
Anybody, to add on these two questions, John, please.
Thank you. I wanted to briefly address the infrastructure question and draw your attention to the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a successful aid program for economic development in a number of African countries, in East and West Africa, in Tanzania, Mozambique, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Benin, and Morocco, which have economically have provided the resources for the economic development of several infrastructure programs in those specific countries. And I also wanted to mention and comment upon the question raised by Madam Calgano of Romania with regards to education, which is something that the International Chamber of Commerce very much cares about, along with the World Trade Organization. Over a year ago, just over a year ago, the International Chamber of Commerce set up an academy in conjunction with International Enterprise Singapore, specifically addressing education and skills development in rules and regulation, and is already offering online. It's an e-platform for education, teaching the industry in general with regards to rules and regulations. And this is something we want to extrapolate to an even greater degree, and would hope that we can collaborate with the World Trade Organization in developing courses which can be of assistance to all organizations, and especially focusing on SMEs.
Shall we go to the question on Nigeria, please? The right of way and price of bandwidth.
Yes, so the question is around how to better enable the internet and digital economy, and also to reduce the cost of doing business and so on. Excellent question. Let me start by acknowledging, like I said when I spoke, that it's an area where we actually consider an emerging success story, in the sense that if you look at what the private sector has done, if you look at what the young population have done, if you look at what is happening in that place, it's nothing short of a revolution. In our view, that's something we can learn a lot from, in terms of how government works with private sector to create the right ecosystem for a sector to take off. Because telecoms has done extremely well in Nigeria in the last 10 or 15 years. And the gentleman that spoke is right to say, what more should we do at this time? And my view is that if a formula is working, you apply more of it. It again has to be a public-private partnership. In fact, both when I was in China, and I know in the meetings that will happen even at this forum, we plan to meet with some of the leading companies that are here, to talk about how we as government can work better with them, to create better infrastructure and better enablement, especially in the area of reducing costs, like you said. And I believe a lot more can be done, but it has to be done through a public-private partnership, and it's one that we're absolutely committed to doing. So I look forward to better results.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have run to the end of our time.
Please.
Sorry? Sorry?
Over here.
Who's speaking? Okay, this lady has one question. Please go ahead because she has raised her hand a couple of times. So this is the last golden opportunity.
Can't see this side.
The world population is women. For inclusive trade, I think World Trade Organization...
Where are you from, please?
I'm from Mumbai, from India, World
Okay.
Trade Center.
Okay.
I feel for inclusive trade, World Trade Organization should take some very specific steps to make women come forward and engage themselves in empowerment, to empower women. How and in what way can WTO support such a movement? Maybe the next forum should be on women empowerment, because that would really lead to inclusive growth.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's an excellent point which we haven't touched much on today. Very, very important question. Where can we start? Cecilia, why don't you pick this first?
Thanks for that. I fully agree with you. And we should do much more. I think because more than half of the population of the world are women. And we know that, and there has been lots of studies showing that if you empower women, especially in the countryside, in developing countries, and of course you know much more about that than I do. And if you enable microloans and some training and assistance, this is really making a big difference. So I think we should do much more on this. We are trying to support some of those projects within the European Union. We can do much more, and this is clearly an issue we need to address if we want to talk about true inclusive growth. So I'm fully on your side.
Next forum on women empowerment.
That is not for me to decide.
Okay, actually, just this afternoon there will be a discussion on women empowerment.
Not a discussion, ma'am, a proper forum.
Okay, that's a suggestion for Roberto. You would like to add one sentence to?
No, I would like to say that this is precisely what it is now. This forum, this one is about inclusiveness. And inclusiveness includes all of those who are marginalized, including women. And by the way, it is our view that helping the small and medium enterprises, for example, you are helping women in general as well. Can we do more specific things? Absolutely. We are, most of all, in the hands of members, by the way. It is members who push the agenda. They are the ones who make proposals. I cannot make a proposal. The moment I make a proposal, I'm out that door very quickly. But members can do that. Now, I will give you one example. When we enable companies in developing countries, for example, to export and to participate in the international global trade flows, women are benefit significantly in most of those countries. I have one number, for example, in front of me, which is very telling, which is the garment industry in Cambodia. 85% of the workforce in the garment industry in Cambodia is composed of women. Now, and that is not, this is just one number. That story happens over and over again as we look. We have another very important number, which is done by the World Bank, which shows that if we eliminate all sorts of discrimination and barriers against women to enter the workforce, you would increase per capita productivity by 40%. That's huge. That's huge. So it's not an untold story. I think we need to react to that story. We just need to do more about that. Now, clearly, there is room for that. I'm hoping that people like you will also make the case before your governments so that they bring this here to the WTO as well. As far as I am concerned, I have one wife, 2 daughters, 3 granddaughters. I'm very sensitive to women's needs, believe me.
Okay. We believe you will truly think for women in your work and in your life. So one last sentence, really, to wrap up things. Okay, you have already talked. I'm sorry, we're really running out of time. I have to wrap it up. One sentence for each to wrap it up for the audience to take away from today's discussion.
I think for me, the subject of inclusiveness is very apt. And what I would like to take away is some concrete steps between the WTO specifically and countries and members like ourselves that we would do, that we can look back and say, this is what came out of the discussion that converted it into meaningful results. I hope that would happen during the course of the next couple of days.
Thank you. Hannah. One sentence, really.
And then on those, where we would go with those concrete steps, I picked up on Director General's, in his opening speech, he asked where the economy will be in 15 years. And I see the world as a marketplace where every small business can participate, engage in commerce in the same way as they are engaging in commerce in their city and in their town right now. So Ministers and Nemala's steps would take us towards that marketplace.
Cecilia?
That we, from this forum and the coming 3 days, also make sure that we bring all these beautiful words into action. Member states of the WTO, NGOs, organizations here present can do a lot. WTO can do a lot as well, not solve all the problems, and that we try to bring them on and to jointly formulate an ambitious forthcoming agenda in the WTO where we're all committed to work on these issues.
John, please.
Thank you. I would say that from the International Chamber of Commerce perspective, inclusive economic development is our overarching theme. And for the benefit of the lady from Mumbai, our current chairman is Sunil Mittal, and he has made the theme of his chairmanship of the International Chamber of Commerce inclusive economic development. So that's something which is really the top of our agenda.
Thank you. Roy?
I'd like to say that the principle of human-centered design is bringing the person you're solving the problem for or with onto the table to hear their opinion. So I'm very glad I was brought onto this. I feel this touches a lot on me and many other people who have the same narrative, but I'd encourage more of this, this conversations, both from the up down and bottom up. So thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. With our collective efforts, with everybody's collective efforts, I hope in the very near future, we won't have to dream inclusive trade. We can live inclusive trade. Thank you very much, gentlemen.